After recently going through the first 3 Mass Effect games, I was dreading this moment. Up until now, all I ever heard was, yeah, don't play Andromeda, big dog. That game is ass. Go ahead and skip that. But me being me, I had to see this through as this is the last game in the franchise. Since I absolutely love 3, I assumed that this would be a step down from that, but what I wasn't anticipating was how big that step down would actually be. And unfortunately, it was a massive step backwards.
Let's get back to the shuttle and...
The gameplay for Mass Effect Andromeda should have been easy to replicate. Coming off of 3, the foundation was already there. The gameplay was already top tier and all BioWare had to do was tweak it, but only a little. Instead, they made it feel completely different even though at its core it's still the same. You're still going through space battles with a squad, but it's just not the same. Let me explain. First off, the camera. For the entirety of the Mass Effect series, the camera has been in third person, and that's still the case here, but for some reason the camera is zoomed out instead of being up close. Now this may seem like a nitpick, but it gives the gameplay an entirely different feel to it. When running all around each place, it's like you're farther away than you should be. The only time it actually zooms in is when you're in combat and holding a gun, then it zooms in how it normally would as you run. It's just a weird change that wasn't necessary, and to my knowledge, there's no way to change it. Up next, the jumping. Again, in the entire trilogy, you cannot jump at all. There was no ability to jump, nor there was any reason to. However, in Andromeda, that was not the case. You could jump and climb onto ledges with a simple press of a button. The change itself is a good idea, but the actual execution feels off. It's too clunky and slow. The best way I can describe this jumping would be like a slower version of the jumping from Returnal if you ever played that. You jump, but it's not as fluid and smooth as it should be, so you'll probably be running into a bunch of stuff. Regardless, I like the idea of the jumping as it does help evade enemy attacks, but it needed to be refined more. Visually, the devs used a Frostbite engine and you can tell right from the start. Everything does look better, but one thing looks noticeably worse: the character models. The environment around them looks really good, as everything is colorful and pops off the screen, but the characters themselves look kinda cheap and fuzzy. I think it wouldn't look as bad if everything was fuzzy, but to have them go against each other makes the models look even worse. This is really apparent during all the moments when there's a close-in on the character's face, as you can see how ugly everyone looks. In my opinion, I thought the engine they used in 3 was perfectly fine. If there was a way to make everything pop more than it did while keeping the models looking the same, that would have been perfect, because it was good the way it was. I'm not gonna lie, there was times where I looked at my screen like, bruh, what am I looking at? Because something or someone just looked that bad. If there was one area that shouldn't have been messed with at all, it was that engine. Shifting gears to the actual combat, it's worse than before, but it actually grew on me the more I played the game. I already mentioned the jumping, but the shooting and movement somehow felt clunkier than the earlier games. And if you played those, then you already know that the movement in those games is already clunky, so that's saying something. A big adjustment for me was the automatic cover in this game. Before, you would have to get near cover and press a button to then go into cover, but now once you got near an item that could protect you, your character would just automatically go into cover. This turned out to be a good change, but again, just another mechanic that was changed that didn't have to be. Although when I started shooting, it did feel good, so that's what really kept me invested into the game. Once I got used to how everything else worked, the gunplay is what really carried me throughout my entire playthrough. Shooting literally anything felt pretty good, especially when using the sniper rifle. The sniper rifle felt just like the older games, as it was satisfying to headshot and kill enemies from far distances. And this was felt in the late game as well. When going against tougher enemies, your weapon always felt like it had a little bit of power to it. It was nice. It wouldn't be a Mass Effect game if you weren't able to create your own character, right? Well, I think this character customization was a little lacking, which surprised me. There wasn't enough options for just about every category, so I ended up making a version of Ryder that I wasn't happy with. If you've seen one of my other Mass Effect reviews, you know how my Commander Shepard looks, and this was not it. But what confused me the most about the lack of customization features in the character screen is how in-depth it was for the guns. Now in Mass Effect, you've always had the ability to upgrade your weapons and get new ones, but in Andromeda, this was taken to a whole new level. You can buy weapons from stores, get them from enemies in combat, or research and develop the weapons yourself. This entire research and development feature was really cool. By acquiring certain points for using your scanner and scanning things in the worlds as you progress, you could unlock blueprints for various weapons which you could then acquire and then develop them into stronger versions of those same weapons. I wish this was in the older games because this was an awesome mechanic. Before we could just spend money or materials to upgrade the weapons, but now you still need materials, but you have so many more options in regards to what you're upgrading and what mods you attach. Yes, you heard that right. Mods do return, and there's more of those than there were before as well. When equipping the mods, you have 2 slots which you can attach to anything, and there's a lot of variance regarding the type of mod that you can choose. Between increasing damage, ammo capacity, and other things, you can help boost areas of your weapon that may be lacking, which is a nice change. And once you understand what each of these mods does, you can use this research and development feature to create a loadout that caters to your playstyle and how you want to play the game. I love games where the emphasis is on player choice, and that has always been the case in Mass Effect, and that's still present, even in this game. The weapons really do make a difference in how much fun the gunplay is during combat, and if you take the time to configure your loadout the right way, you may enjoy the fighting more than you might think. When it comes to content, I think this game had a lot of padding, and these games can take a while to get through if you do a lot or all the side content, but Andromeda was just ridiculous. There are so many worlds and systems to go through it will make your head spin. Then when you add on the fact that there's quests on each of these worlds, it just seems like never-ending content, which can be a good or a bad thing. For me, I was not feeling this game like that to try and even get close to 100%ing it, but this game didn't have a memorable cast for me to devote all that time to doing missions that regarded their individual situations. Just like the past games, this game had loyalty missions. Missions that had you help one of your squad members that will reward you with their loyalty by the end. However, I think this system only works when you have characters that you actually care about. Outside of the Krogan, Drek, I think his name was, there was literally nobody else that I cared about. Nobody. Everybody was just boring and forgettable, unlike the characters from the trilogy. I wasn't invested and didn't want to do their loyalty missions, which was a shame because before I did everybody's loyalty missions. I can't put my finger on what made them so boring, but something was just off. They were missing the sense of personality that I was used to the characters having. It didn't help that the character we play as is just as boring too, so the entire mechanic was a miss compared to before. I did mention a bunch of planets, and one cool thing they brought back was the ability to use a land vehicle across all of them. When on each planet, you could travel all over each world to get to important landmarks, quest objectives, or to find materials. To my surprise, the world wasn't empty either, as there's enemies that you can run into as you're on the way to your destination, along with new areas to explore, all giving you materials and XP. To spice things up, there's usually areas within the world where crossing it damages yourself or the vehicle, making things a bit dicey while traversing. Thankfully, there's a fast travel system so you're not driving from place to place, because sometimes you're going pretty far just to reach the mission. This is more of a subtle change, but I do like the ability to go to planet without running into the Reapers. Now of course we're not dealing with Reapers in this game, but before in Mass Effect 3 when I would be trying to scan planets, running into the Reapers was a pain in the ass. With as many planets as there is in this game, not having to deal with them made it easier to get where you needed to go, which is greatly appreciated. The dialogue choices did return, but I feel like they didn't have as much impact as before. Instead of 2 choices between Renegade and Paragon, you're giving 4 choices that mirrored emotions that you would feel. I did like the extra choices, but it felt as if they had no weight. Before, I knew that if I picked red, then more than likely something bad was going to happen, whereas now if I picked a certain option, the most I would get is a snarky remark or something. This wasn't always the case, but for the majority of the game I just picked whatever because I really wasn't invested into what happened, so I was game for whatever the consequences of my decisions were going to be. This choice-based system is at the core of the Mass Effect gameplay, and it's sad to see that it just doesn't feel like it did before, especially considering the trilogy-defining choice you have to make at the end of 3. The map is something that I thought was pretty easy to navigate. It didn't matter if I was on the ship or on a planet, it usually didn't take long to find what I was looking for. This map issue hasn't really been a big thing for me since the first Mass Effect, and I'm especially happy it wasn't in this game, because even with everything else going on, having a bad map on top of it would have made this game worse than it already is. The gameplay for Mass Effect Andromeda should have been an easy layup, but instead, BioWare took a shot from half court and missed terribly. There was so much that was changed that shouldn't have been, even though the core gameplay is still the same. There are some bright spots that I thought were done well, but for the most part, the gunplay is what allowed me to continue playing this game because everything else was just meh. The story for Mass Effect Andromeda is just okay. Unlike the previous games, there wasn't this ominous threat that felt too much to overcome, but instead it was an alien who I didn't care much for. Not sure if it was the villain's design or their motivations, but I just wasn't feeling them. However, I did like how him and the main character interacted on multiple occasions, with the personalities clashing over important story beats, but even still, it just didn't move the needle. This takes place in 2189 as you play as either a male or female version of Ryder who has just recently become the Pathfinder, which is pretty much the leader after some unfortunate events. On top of that, your sibling is in a coma and you're tasked with finding a new home to inhabit. The setup for the story is pretty good, but I don't think it quite sticks the landing. The biggest thing that gripped me with Mass Effect is how invested I was into the characters and the universe, and in this game, I just wasn't. The game did its best at introducing us to a new cast of faces from different races, all having varying personalities that clash with ours, trying to recreate what we had from before. Unfortunately, too many of these characters are just bland. It could be because of their species, or maybe because we didn't have as much time with them, but when you put everyone together, it just didn't gel like it was supposed to. It's surprising that this is the case because everything went so well together in the previous 3 games, so it's a shock that this didn't happen in Andromeda. It doesn't help that the majority of the game's story is given to you in a short set of story missions. There's so many other missions that give more information on the characters and the story, but like I mentioned before, if you're not invested in these characters or the universe, you're not going to want to do any of that. The pacing of the story was okay, as there's a lot of talking followed by fighting, but it never truly felt like we were building up to something until the end. In the other games, we knew of this daunting task that we had to accomplish later on, so the entire game was just a slow gradual build up until we reached that tipping point. I think what hurts this story is that it feels like there's no connection to the past. Yes, I won't act like I read all the collectibles and know everything because I definitely don't, but just speaking on the main story, it's so different and separate from the other games that I think it hinders the experience if you played those. It's like this game is a spin-off and not a sequel to Mass Effect 3, and if that is the case, please let me know in the comment section below. But my whole point is that BioWare should have just took the time to make Mass Effect 4 or a spin-off game that somehow picks up where we left off or fills in the gaps in between until we get to the next sequel game. Instead, we have a story within a title that just happens to have the name Mass Effect on the cover. To put it simply, the story for Mass Effect Andromeda isn't awful, but it's not memorable for any reason whatsoever. If you were to play through this game and skip all the cutscenes until the end, you could still have an okay understanding of what's going on because it's not that complex, which for a Mass Effect game isn't a good thing. Overall, Mass Effect Andromeda is not good. It's by far the worst game in the Mass Effect series and just doesn't feel like Mass Effect. There's aspects of this game that mirror the older games, but so much has changed in an attempt to enhance it and make it better, it just feels off. I think it's hard to get invested into these characters, and the main character Ryder is nowhere near the level of Commander Shepard that I didn't care about them either. It's just a shame that this game took so many steps back because Mass Effect 3 is literally peak. For those reasons, I'm going to give this game a 5. Mass Effect Andromeda did implement some good ideas and features that should be in the next Mass Effect, but there's just too much here that isn't good. At the heart of every Mass Effect game is the characters and the story, and both missed the mark in this title, making the entire experience different than before, and not in a good way. However, the gunplay is actually pretty fun, and if you enjoy that, then I would say push through and knock out a quick playthrough of this if you never tried it, just so you can say that you at least played it once. I would not recommend getting this at full price, but with this game being out for some years now, you should be able to get this for pretty cheap. Regardless, I was disappointed with this game to say the least, and won't be returning to replay this game ever. But with that ends my experience with the Mass Effect series. I wasn't sure if I was going to like this series before getting into it, but now that I've beaten all the games, I can say that the original trilogy might be the greatest sci-fi video game experience of all time. The dialogue choices combined with the characters, story, and gameplay make for a 3-game run that is just insane. I haven't had this much fun playing a trilogy of games in a long time, and I hope that BioWare locks in and makes Mass Effect 4 close to how the older games were. It doesn't have to rival 2 or 3, but to be honest, it doesn't have to. A modern Mass Effect and current gen graphics with the gameplay and story of the older titles is all we need to have an automatic Game of the Year contender. With only a couple teaser trailers, we don't have much information on Mass Effect 4, but I'm sure by the end of this generation we'll know what we're getting as BioWare is fully focused on development for that game. Until then, we just sit and wait for at least another 4 years for the next Mass Effect. What did you think about Mass Effect Andromeda? Did you like it more than the original trilogy, or did you skip it and are just going to wait for 4? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to watch one of my other reviews right here.